In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all of Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rules of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to be shepherd by my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time where the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left their own country by another road.
Have a seat. I love seeing them. It's it's so much fun. Thank you, Felicia. Thank you, students, for participating today. Well, you know, between Christmas and New Year's, it's a time for a lot of people to do one of my favorite things, which is to binge some TV. Okay, so I don't know what you were watching, but we did happen to see a couple of interesting things this week in terms of the top two shows on Netflix were a little bit different. They were Stranger Things, which basically broke Netflix when the finale aired, and then the newest season of Emily in Paris. And they're such different shows, and I don't know which you prefer, whether you would prefer the thriller, you know, sort of scary thing of Stranger Things, or if you prefer just the light, romantic hope of Emily in Paris. Now, those of you who know me know that I am totally an Emily person. Okay? And so I am completely binging Emily in Paris season 5. I love the lightness of the show. You know, and I've never gotten that much into thriller and scary stuff, but this is actually something which we have to choose in terms of life. Not about fiction. Fiction is fun. You can watch whatever kind of genre of movie or TV show you like, but in real life, we have to really decide whether hope or fear is going to be a stronger force in our lives. So for me, I would rather watch the hope. I would rather watch Emily and find out, is she finally going to find her one true love, versus watching Stranger Things. But that's me, and that's the world of fiction. That's not the world of real life. In real life, my question is, which is a stronger force for you? Which one drives you in your life? Our story begins with these wise men from the east. And by the way, I always remind you, when you look at the text, it never says how many wise men. All right, so the Bible never says 3 wise men. There are 3 gifts. It is only in the more modern Western sensibility that people have decided that 3 gifts must mean 3 people because they can't imagine a group gift. All right. Especially way back when you didn't have like Venmo to be able to send money to each other to split the cost, okay? But the scriptures never actually say how many wise men there are. And these wise men set out on this journey, and they come to Jerusalem. And one of the things that I've preached about is the fact that as they are following this distant star, they make a 9-mile mistake. All right, Bethlehem is approximately 9 miles from Jerusalem, and they make this mistake because they're being influenced by the expectation that if they are in search of someone important, that the important person is going to be found in the capital city, as opposed to a more remote city. It's kind of like if you were following a star from California toward the Washington area, and you saw that the star was over Washington, D.C., and you've come all the way across. You followed Route 80 all the way across, and then you start cutting down or whatever. As you got close, you might believe that the place you're going to find a king is Washington, not like Alexandria. Okay? Because you have been conditioned to believe that the power is going to be where the power has always been. So one of the things that happens in our thinking is that we end up being constrained by the conventional paradigms that are around us. We stay inside the box, and sometimes we don't see the possibilities that might lie outside of the realm of conventional thinking. And that can lead us to an incorrect analysis of the situation that we're in. So the wise men show up in the palace because they believe that power is going to be where power is in their normal lives, and they just presume that they know, and so they go, "Where is the child who's been born King of the Jews? We observed the star, and we've come to pay him homage." Now, because Herod hears the word king, he presumes this is a threat. Now, by the way, in terms of the lectionary sequence, this is one of the few times when it goes backwards. And so just in that 3-year sequence of passages, what you end up with in these 2 weeks, every 3 years, is that last week's gospel was the next story. And so last week we talked about the story that follows this one, which was Herod ordering the murder of all of the babies in Jerusalem. And what I mentioned last week was that when Herod presumes there's a threat against him, he acts with the utmost brutality. And so what he had done when he had presumed or believed that even his own family presented a threat to him, he had ordered his wife executed along with 3 of his own sons. So that's the extent of brutality that Herod was capable of. And so when he hears the word king, he is frightened. And he's frightened with absolutely no further evidence that he ought to be frightened. Okay? Because it's a baby. What's the actual threat? He doesn't wait to see whether the threat actually is what he thinks it might be. Rather, he chooses the path of fear. And this word frightened in the Greek is this word tarasso. And this word tarasso is speaking about an inward fear. It's inward turmoil. It's not the kind of fear that is rational and external. Like, a bear is chasing you in the woods. That's a legitimate external fear. Tarasso is an inward turmoil that happens. And this inward turmoil is often far worse for us because we're conjuring it out of nowhere. Because in reality, Herod had no reason to be afraid. Jesus was not coming for the purpose of deposing secular rulers. Jesus did not come to depose Caesar, even though Herod even though this Herod would only live for a few more years, his successors were not deposed by Jesus. Jesus didn't come with the intent of overthrowing the secular rulers in society. So he had actually no reason to fear this child, this baby king. The irrational fear is what led Herod to do horrible things. And I really wonder how many of our fears are internal and unjustified. How many of us actually are capable? I'm really good at this, by the way. You give me a blank canvas, and I'm really good at seeing disaster. All right. So I'm really good at what you would call catastrophic thinking. Okay. So it's one of my skills. So I can take a blank canvas and I can imagine the worst possible thing happening, even though the vast majority of the time it never happens. All right. And I wonder how many of us fall prey to that. How many of us are capable of looking into a situation and immediately seeing the worst possible outcome without actually having a concrete, rational basis for believing that that fear is justified? Herod does that. All he's heard about is a baby of whom these foreigners who are not Jewish, who are not from the tradition, refer to as a king, and he presumes that this little baby is immediately going to be a threat to his rule. And he acts. But the first way he acts is by misrepresenting himself to the wise men. He says, "Go, search diligently. When you found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." He's trying to get this information so that he can have the baby executed. When he doesn't get the information from the wise men, that is what leads to the next story, which was last week's story, which is Herod ordering the murder of all the babies under 2, because if he doesn't know which specific baby it is, he's going to have them all killed. But of course, he can't admit this to the wise men. And it's a reminder that one of the things that fear does, especially imaginary fear, is it makes us dishonest. One of the first casualties of fear is honesty. I mean, think about why people lie, all right? They fear punishment. That's one of the reasons why they lie, right? Isn't that what happens when we're kids? We have to be taught about this, because kids will lie because they don't want to be punished. We lie when we don't want to be embarrassed, all right? So we often misrepresent ourselves because we're afraid of embarrassment. But so often it is fear of the consequences of truth that drives us to be dishonest. So many times, dishonesty is actually rooted in fear. It's one of the first things that happens when we're afraid. So Herod consults the scribes and the experts as well in wanting to know where this baby would be. So he inquires of the chief priests and the scribes where the Messiah is to be born. He turns to experts who have no real interest in this, because I don't think they believe that this is actually happening. After all, the wise men who've come to bring word are from a far-off land, and they're not Jewish. And so they're outsiders. And this is true of clergy, it's true of doctors, it's true of lawyers, it's true of people in almost any profession, that we have a tendency to only trust the opinions of people who are in our profession. All right? Now, that doesn't mean that that's always unjustified, okay? There are a lot of good reasons why physicians only trust physicians for medical advice. There are a lot of good reasons why lawyers only trust lawyers for legal advice. And there's good reason why clergy really trust the theology of clergy. But that's not always the case. We always have to be open to the possibility that maybe the person on the outside, the person who can see the evidence with fresh eyes, is actually able to see something that we can't see because we're locked into the conventional thinking of whatever profession that we're in. So the chief priests hear this news. They don't do anything with it. They don't care. They lack the curiosity to even investigate whether this might actually be happening. So they know, but they don't act. They know where it's supposed to happen. They get this word from these outsiders that it's happening, and yet they don't even bother to position themselves to see whether it might be true. These wise men have traveled hundreds of miles to get to this area. And as I said, they only missed by 9 miles. Bethlehem is just 9 miles from Jerusalem. The experts won't even bother to go 9 miles to see whether it might actually be happening, because they're content to have status. They're content to be the experts whom the king would turn to for knowledge. They won't bother to actually act on what they know or what they hear. The wise men, they saw the star and they acted. The wise men saw the star and they undertook a journey that was incredibly arduous. And he's not even their Messiah. They don't know that the real meaning behind this sign going to wise men from a country far away was that it was a message from God that the purpose, the mission of the Messiah was to apply not just to the Jewish people, but to all of humanity. It was with intention that this star revealed to them the coming of a king who was not just for a narrow group of people, but was for all people. But they didn't know the details, yet they understood it was important, so they left. The wise men followed even though they weren't certain. They don't have the knowledge that it's going to be in Bethlehem. They end up in the wrong town. They don't know what it means for them or for all of humanity, but they went anyway. So in this story, you've got all these players, all these characters with different motivations. You have Herod, who's afraid of someone who's going to usurp his rule. You have the experts who are content to be experts and highly regarded and consulted by the king. You have the wise men, and they behave differently, based really on a decision of whether they're going to be guided by hope or by fear. Which one will you follow? Will you be driven by fear to undertake immoral actions, to be dishonest? Will you know and yet not act the way the experts did? Or will you choose to be guided by hope and set off in pursuit of the hope, even when the hope is unclear? After they arrive and meet the baby Jesus, they're warned in a dream not to return to Herod, and they leave for their own country by another road. So here are those dreams coming up again in this story. Dreams play such an important role in Matthew's gospel, and these dreams lead them off the beaten path. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't have a map. They just followed a star to get to where they were. And then they're told to go home with yet another different path. And unlike today, where we have GPS, we have Google Maps. I mean, it's probably been, I don't know, I would say it's been at least a decade since I've been afraid of being lost in my car. Right? Because no matter where you are, I know that the Lord is with me, and so is Google Maps. Right? And Google Maps will speak to me in a voice that I recognize. And wherever I am, it will guide me to where I'm trying to get. Okay? They don't have that. They've just had a star lead them to where they were going, and they're probably just going to use the stars to try and find their way home without knowing at all what those roads are going to be like. They have no idea where they're going to hit a dead end. They have no idea where they're going to face bandits. They have no idea where there's going to be an impassable river or a mountain, whatever it is. I have no idea what the topography is like between where they were and where they ended up, or what they might face going back. They just know they have to go back via a path they had not taken before. But this came to them in a dream. And I love that metaphor because it is, in fact, dreams that can lead us to new possibilities. When we follow dreams, it can take us off the path that we know. It can take us off the path that is familiar to us. And we start to go outside the box. We start to travel a road that hasn't been dictated by convention. We take a road that we're willing to take despite whatever fears we may have. New possibilities open up for us. And when we do that, sometimes the result is amazing, because it tells us that when they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. They'd followed their hearts, unclear that they even understood why they were doing this. They knew that Jesus was a king. They knew that there was some kind of celestial significance to this, but they had no theology behind it. They had no scripture behind it, since they were not from the Jewish tradition. But they simply had this joy that came because they followed a star into the unknown. They followed a star along a path that they did not know, that was unfamiliar. They chose the possibility of what they would be following over the fear that would normally be present. And so I wonder, for us, as we're starting this new year, I wonder if in this new year that's a choice you're willing to make. And I wonder, in this new year, what's the star that might lead you to joy? Because as we start this new year, we can choose whether we're going to imagine hope or fear. As we don't know what this year is going to hold for us, we can choose to see in it all the things that could go wrong, or we can choose instead to imagine all of the possibilities. We can choose whether we're going to basically stay put, or whether we're going to set out on a journey. We can demand certainty before we take off, or we can simply see a star in the far-off sky and understand that that is what we're meant to follow. And I hope that as we see that star, whatever it is for you, whatever that star may look like, because that star may be something that is very different for each one of us, that instead of staying put, instead of being afraid of what might go wrong, that we would instead choose to follow it. And we pray that in this new year, that star that we follow will lead us, like it did the wise men, to a place of overwhelming joy. Amen.